Hey guys, welcome back to Based MMA. In this video, I'm going to be discussing UFC in 2023. I'm going to be recapping the best fighters of the year, best events of the year, worst performances, my worst prediction, my best prediction, guys. I've been wanting to make this video for a while, and I actually was going to make this video into separate parts, but I just kind of wanted to make it one cohesive recap of UFC for 2023. This has been a crazy year. Lots of new champions, lots of upsets. I feel like this is a year of the UFC upsets where a lot of us MMA fans, we had a good idea of who was going to win a fight, and then, you know, the underdogs started winning. So it was the year of the underdogs. It's been a crazy and amazing year. This has been the year that I started my YouTube channel and I actually started making videos, and it's been a dream come true. I know that my channel is still pretty small, but I have big goals for 2024. I have dreams of you know, reaching 100,000 subscribers and really making this a career, guys. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I hope you guys are having amazing holidays. So let's get started with 2023 and UFC. So let's start off with my best prediction for 2023 was that Charles Oliveira would finish Beneil Dariush at UFC 289. A lot of people were picking Beneil Dariush in that fight, and I just could not understand why. I know that Beneil Dariush is a great fighter, great grappler, but when it came to the striking, especially when I went back to actually rewatch tape in preparation for that fight, I realized that Beneil Dariush was very slow twitch when it came to the striking, and even though he hits very hard and he's also a southpaw, I thought that Charles Oliveira was just going to be too fast, too dynamic, and that's exactly what happened. So that was my best prediction for 2023. Now, my worst prediction for 2023, I've had a lot of bad predictions. I mean, I picked Cyril Gane to win. I picked who else did I pick? I picked Aljamain Sterling. I mean, I know that one was, you know, a lot of people picked Sterling. I picked Yuri Prohaska against Alex Pereira, but my worst prediction for sure has to be picking Volkanovski in the rematch against Islam on short notice. That has to be my worst prediction. I'm a big Volkanovski fan, so I was delusional. And even though in that prediction video, I obviously mentioned that, you know, I knew that I was shooting at the stars. I knew that something crazy had to happen for Volkanovski. But I guess just based on the fact that there was a lot of upsets, that Sean Strickland had just beat Israel Adesanya, that Sean O'Malley had just pulled off the upset against Aljamain Sterling, I felt like, why not? Let me pick Volkanovski against Islam Makhachev in the rematch. He's gonna get it done, and I ended up being so wrong. I felt so stupid after that fight, and I also felt depressed after that fight because I was like, man, Volkanovski got knocked out. This is absolutely gonna change his career. Even though I told you guys that the change of the cards, the fact that the cards changed so much, a lot of people thought that the card was better. I knew that the card was not going to be better, man, because on 1 week notice, the cards never end up being better than the original card, and that's exactly what happened. But yes, guys, my worst prediction for 2023 has been picking Volkanovski to beat Islam Makhachev in the rematch. Now, moving on to the best fight of the year, in my opinion. And this has to be the best fight of the year because so many MMA fans, I think so many people became like hardcore MMA fans after this fight. I remember the discussion after this fight was absolutely incredible. That has to be Islam Makhachev versus Alexander Volkanovski 2 that took place in February, UFC 284. One of the best fights I've ever seen, man. It was insane. Even though maybe it's not as action-packed or violent as some of the other fights this year, I still thought that it was a technical marvel, that it was incredible. It was beautiful to see the technique on display. You knew you were seeing two of the greatest fighters in their prime fighting each other. Like, when you get to see that, you know what I'm saying? Islam Makhachev showed that, you know, he could go 5 rounds and win a fight, a close fight. Volkanovski showed to be better than a lot of people expected. A lot of people were expecting Volkanovski to just get absolutely destroyed by Islam Makhachev. He hold his own against Islam Makhachev, and a lot of people thought he won. And I remember after that fight, just the debates that happened. Some people thought Volkanovski won. When I first watched it, I was very biased and I thought Volkanovski had pulled it off. But more and more I rewatched it, I realized that Islam Makhachev, I think, did enough. You could even make the argument he won 4 rounds, but I gave it Islam 3-2. But just one of the greatest fights in MMA, man. The discussion the days after that Islam versus Volk fight are just so surreal, and I absolutely love being an MMA fan. And for that reason, Islam versus Volk is my favorite fight. At number 2 for that was actually Alexander Pantoja versus Brandon Moreno, because it was just straight up violence for 5 rounds. And those are the type of fights that I love. Don't get me wrong. I love to see knockouts. I love to see submissions. But sometimes you want to see 2 guys just bite down on their mouthpiece and go 5 rounds. And that's exactly what Pantoja versus Moreno was. Now, moving on to the best fighters of the year. And I've been struggling, man. I have 2 fighters that I believe deserve best fighters of the year. And I'm going to go with Islam Makhachev. Because even though that second Volkanovski fight was on short notice, he put one of the greatest performances against somebody as good as Volkanovski. And in that first fight, he also had an incredible performance against Volkanovski. Now, on second place is Sean Strickland, man, because he fought in January on short notice against Imavov, was able to pull that win. He was the slight underdog going into that fight, puts a good fight. Then the UFC feeds him Abuz Nurmagomedov, and the UFC is clearly trying to, push Abuz Nurmagomedov to the top of the division. Clearly they wanted Abuz to beat Sean Strickland. Sean Strickland is able to beat Abuz Nurmagomedov in the second round, and then he doesn't earn, but he gets a title shot because Dricus du Plessis was injured. And Sean Strickland pulls one of the biggest upsets in MMA against Israel Adesanya, where he not only, he didn't just go out there and like land this lucky punch and, drop Israel Adesanya and then it was an early stoppage. No, nothing like that. Sean Strickland schooled Israel Adesanya for 5 rounds. Who would have thought that? So even though I think Sean Strickland's performance over Israel Adesanya is more of a shocker, more of an upset, I think that Islam Makhachev's 2 performances, the fact that he's getting better, in my opinion, is more impressive. Even though, Sean Strickland, Imavov, maybe Imavov is not as good as people say. Abuz Nurmagomedov was an unranked fighter. He was untested, so we didn't really know how good Abuz Nurmagomedov was. So in my opinion, those 2 guys, Sean Strickland and Islam Makhachev, are the fighters of the year. Now, moving on to the best female fighter of the year, I'm gonna pick Alexa Grasso just because she pulled one of the biggest upsets in female MMA. I mean, that upset over Valentina Shevchenko was very shocking. Not a lot of people were picking her. I don't think anybody picked her to be Valentina Shevchenko. And even though the second fight was a rematch, and I personally thought she might have lost, she still put a great performance. I think Weili Zhang, she fought once, but she put a very dominant performance on Amanda Lemos. And third place for me was Erin Blanchfield. I mean, she put a great performance against Jessica Andrade, and then she was able to defeat Tyler Santos in a very impressive manner. And very close fight, but I think, Tyler Santos is very good. So Erin Blanchfield, she's my favorite female fighter, and I think she had a great year. So for that reason, she's number 3. Now, moving on to the best prospects of 2023. I'm going to go with Benoit Saint Denis, guys. Benoit Saint Denis, a guy that came out of nowhere, a guy that was an underdog against Bonfim, pulls the upset, is able to get the submission, and then puts one of the greatest head kick KOs I've ever seen against Matt Favola at UFC 295. So for that reason, he's the best prospect. Another prospect that had an amazing head kick was actually Roman Kopylov, man. Roman Kopylov, he's improved his grappling. His striking looks phenomenal. I just love how he works the body. That's a little sus, but Roman Kopylov is one of my favorite prospects. Now, moving on to the knockout of the year. There's been a lot of crazy knockouts, man. I mean, we just had Emmett versus Mitchell. That was a crazy knockout. Adesanya versus Pereira 2. Gaethje versus Poirier 2. But in my personal opinion, the knockout of the year has to be Justin Gaethje head kick KO over Dustin Poirier. I mean, that head kick was crazy, man. I was so shocked. I could not believe it. I think the Adesanya versus Pereira should be a close second. Emmett versus Mitchell, man, that was a scary knockout. Talk about a scary knockout Emmett versus Mitchell was. So in my opinion, KO of the year was Gaethje versus Poirier. Now, moving on to the best UFC pay-per-view of the year, in my opinion. The best card from top to bottom, in my opinion, was UFC 290. There was so many great fights on the main card. We had Well, in the prelims, there was a Robbie Lawler versus Nico Price. Main card, Bo Nickel versus Val Woodburn. Jalen Turner versus Dan Hooker. That was a fight of the year. Dricus Duplessis pulls off the upset against Robert Whittaker. Brandon Moreno versus Alexander Pantoja, one of the best fights of the year. And then the incredible performance from Alexander Volkanovski against Yair Rodriguez. So for that reason, in my opinion, the best pay-per-view of the year in terms of actually delivering in terms of the fights was UFC 290. Now moving on to the best UFC fight night. I'm a little biased because I actually went to watch it live. UFC Austin was the best fight night of the year, man. So many crazy knockouts, so many slam knockouts. The fights were entertaining. Crazy upsets. I mean, not crazy upsets. Yeah, crazy upsets. Deiveson Figueiredo was an underdog. Sean Brady, I don't think he was an underdog when it came to the odds, but a lot of MMA fans, including myself, were picking Kelvin Gastelum to win that fight. So just a crazy night of fights. One of the best fight night cards ever. It was so awesome to actually be there live. So my favorite fight night was UFC Austin. Now moving on to the worst UFC pay-per-view. And yeah, this might be a little bit of recency bias, but I think that the worst pay-per-view in terms of actually delivering, maybe in terms of names, it's not the worst. UFC 296, in my opinion, was the worst card because I just felt like none of the fights really delivered. Besides, I'm talking about the main card, okay? I know that the prelims delivered. The Cody Garbrandt fight. Andre Fili fight was pretty good as well. Irene Aldana's fight against Carol Rosa was pretty entertaining as well. But when it came to the main card, besides that shocking knockout that Josh Emmett had over Bryce Mitchell, the card was pretty lackluster. I mean, Tony Ferguson looked terrible. Paddy Pimbley looked alright. Shavkat Ramanov easily beats Wonderboy. It wasn't really of a fight. It was more a clinch fest. Pantoja versus Royval was dragged, longed out, and it wasn't that entertaining. And don't even get me started on Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. So for that reason, UFC 296, in my opinion, is the worst pay-per-view of the year. Now, moving on to the worst UFC fight night of the year has to be Spivak versus Lewis. That card was absolutely terrible. At my time, it was like at 11 p.m. and Lewis absolutely sucked and got submitted in one round, and the whole card just was terrible. Now, moving on to the biggest upsets of the year, man. I'm going to put 3 fights on here. Alexa Grasso beats Valentina. That has to be up there. Dricus Duplessis beating Robert Whittaker. In my opinion, that's the biggest upset because of how much I underestimated Dricus Duplessis. I thought this guy's just a brawler. He fights like a drunk. He was coming off that win against Derek Brunson, and then prior to that, he was coming off that win against Darren Till. And I was like, man, what's the hype with this guy? Like, I don't really get the hype. He just fights like a brawler. He doesn't look like a great fighter. He just looks like this big, strong guy. But against Robert Whittaker, he showed that his pressure is dangerous. He showed that he has a lot of power. He showed that he's very well rounded. And I was just in shock, man, because I thought Robert Whittaker was such a lock against Dricus, and I was so wrong. So for that reason, Dricus versus Whittaker has to be the biggest upset of UFC on UFC 2023, I guess. The biggest I'm him performance, I have a couple contenders. Tom Aspinall versus Pavlovich, Jamal Hill versus Glover Teixeira, Islam versus Volk 2, and Sean O'Malley versus Aljo. And the biggest I'm him performance goes to Sean O'Malley, guys. I think Sean O'Malley's performance over Aljamain Sterling is impressive, especially that he was going into that fight injured. He put that kind of performance, and just the fact he so easily dismantled Aljamain Sterling, and the way he just looked at the crowd, and the fact that he became champion, the guy that the UFC wanted to become champion, I felt like that was the biggest I'm him performance. And the fact that what was his walkout song? His walkout song is definitely an I'm him performance. What was his song? I forgot his walkout song, but it was absolutely incredible. Tom Aspinall versus Pavlovich, also, honorable mention. Tom Aspinall puts an incredible performance. Jamal Hill over Glover Teixeira. A lot of people were underestimating Jamal Hill going into that fight. And the way Islam head kicked Volkanovski and then told the crowd to shush. That gave me chills, man. That gave me chills. Even as a Volkanovski fan, that was incredible. Now, moving on to the worst early stoppage, has to go to Yuri versus Pereira. I'm not even going to talk about that too much. Now, moving on to the worst robbery, Amir Albasi versus Kai Kara France, one of the worst robberies of all time. Best trash talker in 2023. I'm a little biased because he's really based. It's going to Manel Cap. The fact that he stood up and started talking shit to Israel Adesanya was absolutely gold. Moving on to fights that were hyped that did not deliver. In my opinion, Leon versus Colby did not deliver. Hamza versus Usman did not deliver. Pereira versus Yuri did not deliver. Now moving on to my favorite new fighter of 2023 has to be Diego Lopez and Val Woodburn. Val Woodburn is the GOAT of MMA. Diego Lopez is going to destroy Ilia Topuria and Volkanovski easily. Diego Lopez is the GOAT of MMA. He beats Khabib. He beats everyone, man. Diego Lopez is the GOAT. Now moving on to the worst performance, maybe I'm also a lot of recency bias. Colby Covington, that he showed up, talked a lot of shit, and he just stood there with his ass out and put one of the worst performances I've ever seen in the UFC. My favorite champion, Alexander Volkanovski. I absolutely love Alexander Volkanovski. I love his mindset. I love his work ethic, and I just love his skills. And even though I know he doesn't have a lot of knockouts, I still find him very entertaining. Now moving on to my least favorite champion. I don't really dislike any of the UFC champions currently, but in my opinion, Leon Edwards is just boring, man. Boring on the mic, boring fighting style. For a guy that's such a striker, Leon Edwards is incredibly boring, so he's my least favorite champion, guys. But anyway, that's just my recap of UFC 2023. I know I could have gone more into depth, and I might make another video talking about UFC in 2023, but for now, this is the Base MMA Awards. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think of these picks or of these choices that I made. Let me know. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.